I'm Sean Cole. This is the Simpit, and today we're here to talk about kicking off a new season. Now, if you race in a league, or even if you run in any of the series on like iRacing or any other sim with a leaderboard competition where you run the same car all season, a new season usually brings on a new car, and with it comes new challenges. Now, if you're an alien sim racer, this probably doesn't mean a whole lot to you. But if you're an average Joe or a beginner, I'm going to tell you there are a few tricks you can do so that you can head into the season with a whole lot of momentum without being an engineer or a sim racing expert. Now, based on the title, Does My Ass Look Fat? You might be thinking I'm about to start telling you to do some cardio training or just do some weightlifting to get strong for the season, but that's not what I'm talking about at all today. What I really meant was spatial awareness. Does my ass look fat? Like, is the rear end of the car wider than I think it is? Or am I placing the car exactly where I want it to be on the track? And that is just one of my thoughts heading into a new season with a new car that I need to make adjustments for. Are you guilty of not using all of the track? Are you guilty of putting two wheels off the track and potentially spinning out or crashing? Both of these issues could be as simple as spatial awareness. When switching to a new car for a new season, it's really beneficial to have an idea how big or small the car is. Having visual references that give you an idea just how close you can get when running side by side with another car, or nose to tail when drafting, or just how big or small the car is when trying to maximize corners will make a really big difference and a big payoff throughout the season. And there are things you can do to prepare for this. Like take your car out on the track, looking for walls that you can pull up next to, and see just how close you can get your car to the wall before touching it. This can give you a good reference for the left and right hand sides of your car or just how wide it is. You can also pull up to curbing. Let's position our car right on the edge of that curb to get a visual reference from in the car of what it looks like when you're at the very edge of the track. You can also use other cars on the track or physically sitting there on pit lane. You can pull up to them until they touch, and this gives you a visual reference of what it looks like when drafting, but not wanting to hit the back of the car in front of you. You can also back up until you touch the nose of another car to see what it looks like in the mirrors. How many times have you looked in your mirrors thinking a car was much closer or further away than you thought? This visual reference cures that problem as well. A big theme of preparation for a new car and a new season really is just getting back to the basics. So I think about threshold braking. I've been guilty of jumping into cars and not really utilizing the full braking potential of the car that I just jumped into. When preparing for a season, knowing exactly the boundaries, just how far you can press the pedal before getting any kind of lockup out of the car is super important, and it is different for every car. I do start with excessive braking drills. If I'm doing 100 miles or so down the straightaway, I want to know just how hard I can slam on the brakes before lockup or other ill handling effects come into play. I'll do this at first right in the middle of a straightaway. And after getting an idea of what threshold braking feels like, I can start testing that into specific corners, not just light braking. Does the car control itself into corners the same way it did in a straight line? Does it tend to create understeer and not want to turn in? Does it create oversteer and want to just spin out? We'll get back to those questions shortly. At this point, I'm dying to jump into setup, but I'm going to leave that for later for a good reason. But let's remember those oversteer and understeer conditions. Another area that is often overlooked in a new season is control mapping. I mean, I'm sure you already mapped all your controls and you got comfortable with it. Yet when we are racing, we always hear someone on the microphone talk about not having this or that mapped on their wheel. This starts with the basics of being able to cycle through the black box screens and make any needed changes there. In addition to that, your new car might have specific adjustments that can be mapped to your wheel. This could be brake bias, traction control, sway bar adjustments, and a handful of others depending on the car, including tear-offs for open wheelers. For a new season, I am checking the controls available for on-the-fly adjustment, mapping them to my wheel, and making sure they are marked properly. If you have extra buttons on your wheel or a button box, you might even want to add macros to chat boxes on iRacing. Instead of buttons for saying thank you or sorry, it could be telling your pits 4 gallons of gas and no tires. In other words, a pre-set up splash and go condition. This is super helpful for oval racers out there. Another part of preparation for a league or a new season is the rules. Understanding the rules and the conditions that you're going to be racing under. Every league has its own rules, and these factors will affect other things like your setup or the way you drive or the timing of the event, and it is on you to be responsible for knowing these rules. How many times have you heard someone say, "Oh shoot, I missed the starting line"? But you should know, how long is the race? Is it timed or amount of laps? Is it a rolling or a standing start? Will you need fuel? Will you need tires? In a league environment, none of these things should be a surprise to you once the green flag drops. And that takes us to setups. And setups can be a tricky question both in real life racing and in simulated racing as well. Now, me personally, I am not a setup guy. So my time is probably better spent working on my driving line, working on things that I can control as a driver than worried about setup other than a few small changes that I'll make. Now, for others, purchasing a setup, there are a lot of great places that you can buy setups. They will cost you money, but it's probably not a bad idea if you want to go faster, because a good setup can be a difference of 1 to 2 seconds. Now, for us amateurs, us people who are not engineers, who do not know how to build a setup, there are a few things that we can change, a few adjustments that we can make that will be beneficial. Using iRacing as an example, most of the road racing cars come with setups for each track, but sometimes you're just dealing with a low, medium, and high downforce car. And all of those are going to make a good starting point for what we're going to be able to do with the car. Now, it really starts with the rules. We talked about the rules. One of them was, how long is the race? You need to know how long. Is it a sprint race? Is it a long race? Is there going to be a pit stop? Because from there, we can make other adjustments. When you think about gasoline weighing 6 pounds per gallon, carrying extra fuel could be like having a passenger in the car. And if you're only doing a sprint race, you just don't need that much fuel. If your racing series requires a pit stop, you need to understand that time lost on pit lane is almost impossible to make up on track. So when you're adding 12 gallons when you only need 5, you're spending way too much time on pit lane and losing positions. Knowing the gas mileage of the car you're driving and knowing the exact length of the race will allow you to judge total fuel and make that part of your setup. There are programs that you can use like Crew Chief, or even information that can be displayed on many dashboards via something like SimHub that can give you fuel mileage. Or you can do it the old-fashioned way and run a certain amount of laps and figure out how much fuel you burned. For those running sprint races, you really only want to carry the exact amount of fuel to get to the checkered flag. You don't want that extra weight on board in a short race, especially in lower horsepower cars where it's going to be even more noticeable. For those who do require a pit stop during their race, knowing exactly how much fuel it's going to take to get to the end is going to be critical. Taking extra fuel is going to cost you a ton of time. For example, taking 5.5 gallons in the radical will take approximately 16 seconds. 10.6 gallons will take 29 seconds, and filling it to the brim with 21.2 gallons will take 49 seconds long. A mistake between 5 gallons, if that's all you need, and 10 gallons is a 13-second loss of time, which is going to be a bunch of positions, or at a half a second a lap would take you 26 laps to make up. In fact, the guy filling it up would still be on pit lane as I finish this sentence. Earlier we did that threshold braking, and we did continue that into trail braking and found out if our car was suffering from oversteer or understeer. And without being an engineer, there are corrections we can make to the car to help cure that and still be able to use those setups. And if you do pay for setups and you're downloading alien setups, you're going to find that they almost always suffer from corner entry oversteer, making them virtually impossible for you to drive, certainly not at the same lap times as the aliens, and it is about getting to the checkered flag. Brake bias is the fastest, easiest, and simplest way to cure this issue. So when you were doing that threshold braking, lightening the brake into trail braking and turning for apex, if that car really wanted to go around too much, that oversteer meant you needed more front brake bias. On the other hand, if that car just didn't really want to turn or you needed a little more help getting it to pivot, then you can turn in a little bit more rear brake bias and get the car to rotate better. This one setup trick or on-the-fly adjustment to adjust for the way the car handles mid-race, if you mapped your controls properly, can be the saving grace to a setup. On a final note before we bring this to a close, goes back to the rules again, and that means know your calendar. Know the start time of the race. Know the amount of time for practice before qualifying. Know if there is a break between qualifying and the race start, because you don't want to miss the beginning of the race. We always hear someone on the mic saying, "Oh, I missed the green flag," and then they end up starting on pit lane, which is really removing your chances from success before we even started the race. So the theme here is there is no good excuse for lack of preparation heading into the new season. You don't want to be playing catch up after the first, second, or third race. You're never going to do well on the points if that's the way you headed into it. So I hope a couple of these tips or tricks helped you out when you start your new season off. And if you have ideas for other beginners that you think will be beneficial, be sure to put them into the comments below. Be sure to thumbs up this show if you liked it. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you can find out when our next video comes out. And most of all, thank you for watching. This is the Simpit. I'm Sean Cole, and I'll see you on the track.